The crowd roars. 50,000 Romans scream for blood. A gladiator raises his weapon, a weapon so terrifying that even battle-hardened legionnaires refuse to touch it. In 3 seconds, someone will be dead. This weapon was banned by emperors, twice, but the people demanded it back. The Roman Colosseum was where death was entertainment, and weapons were designed for one thing: the most spectacular kill possible. From 72 to 438 AD, over 400,000 gladiators fought and died. They wielded weapons that were part tool, part theater prop, and completely lethal. These weren't just random swords and spears. Each weapon was carefully chosen for different types of gladiators, different fighting styles, and different ways to entertain a crowd that demanded blood.
Hit the like button, subscribe, and march into the Colosseum with me.
And let's march into the Colosseum to explore the 20 most brutal weapons gladiators used to survive in the world's deadliest arena. And number 7, you won't believe what it could do to human bone. Number 1, Gladius. Let's start with the weapon that gave gladiators their name, the gladius. This wasn't your typical longsword from the movies. At just 18 to 24 inches, the gladius was built for one thing: efficient killing in close quarters. Roman gladiators like the Samnites and later the Secutores wielded this double-edged blade with deadly precision. It was designed for stabbing, not slashing. Why? Because a stab wound to the torso was almost always fatal, while slash wounds were often survivable. Historical records show that in mock naval battles called naumachiae, gladiators armed with gladi would board actual ships flooded in the arena and fight to the death while the crowd watched from above. Emperor Claudius once staged a naumachia with 19,000 participants, most armed with gladi. The survival rate? Less than 50%. Number 2, the Sica. If the gladius was efficient, the Sica was downright cruel. This curved, sickle-like blade was the signature weapon of Thracian gladiators, and it was designed to cause maximum psychological terror. The Sica's curved design wasn't just for show. It could hook behind an opponent's shield, slice through the tendons behind the knee, or deliver a devastating upward cut to the torso that would spill intestines onto the arena floor. One documented fight from 65 AD describes a Thracian named Flamma, who used his Sica to defeat 34 opponents over his career. His technique? He would feint high with the curved blade, then hook low to hamstring his opponent before delivering the killing blow. The crowd loved the spectacle of watching a man fall, unable to stand before the final strike. 3. Trident. Speaking of psychological warfare, nothing struck fear like the trident of a retiarius. Standing 9 feet long with 3 razor-sharp prongs, this weapon turned gladiators into human fishing spears. The retiarius, or net fighter, was one of the most popular gladiator types specifically because of how they used the trident. They wouldn't just stab, they would pin opponents to the ground like insects, then slowly twist the weapon to cause maximum agony before the kill. Emperor Commodus himself fought as a retiarius in 192 AD, though his opponents were given blunted weapons while he used a real trident. Historical accounts describe him pinning a wounded gladiator to the sand and leaving him there for several minutes while the crowd decided his fate. When they gave thumbs down, Commodus drove all 3 prongs through the man's chest. 4. The rete. Paired with the trident, the rete or net was perhaps the most psychologically brutal weapon in the arena. Made of weighted rope with lead balls at the corners, the rete could immobilize a fully armored opponent in seconds. Once entangled, gladiators were completely helpless while their opponent decided how to kill them. Some retiari would drag their netted victims around the arena like captured animals, before finally using the trident. One famous match from 80 AD during the Colosseum's inaugural games involved a retiarius who caught his opponent but chose not to kill him immediately. Instead, he dragged the helpless gladiator to each section of the crowd, letting them see the fear in the trapped man's eyes before finally ending it with a trident thrust to the throat. The crowd went wild. Number 5. Scissor. Now we get to one of the most terrifying weapons ever created for the arena, the scissor. Picture a gauntlet that extends up your entire arm, ending in a massive curved blade that looks like a crab's claw. This weapon was so brutal it only appeared in special exhibitions. The scissor gladiator would charge at opponents and literally cut them in half with a scissoring motion. The weapon could slice through armor, bone, and flesh in a single strike. There are records of scissor gladiators decapitating multiple opponents in a single swing. Emperor Domitian was fascinated by scissor fights and would order condemned criminals to face them. It wasn't a fight, it was an execution with style. The only recorded instance of someone defeating a scissor gladiator was when a clever retiarius managed to tangle the weapon in his net, but even then, the scissor fighter nearly broke free before being finished with a trident. 6. Cestus. If you think modern boxing is brutal, try getting hit by the cestus. These weren't just leather gloves, they were weapons of mass destruction strapped to your fists, made of leather wrapped with metal studs, spikes, and sometimes even razor blades. Cestus fighters, called pugilators, would fight in matches that rarely lasted more than a few minutes. One punch to the head with a well-crafted cestus could cave in a skull. Punches to the body would leave permanent damage, even if the fighter survived. The most famous cestus match in history occurred in 67 AD when Emperor Nero ordered two brothers to fight each other to the death wearing cestus. The younger brother managed to knock out the older one with a single punch to the temple, but the impact was so severe that both fighters died, one from the blow, the other from the horror of what he'd done to his own brother. Number 7. Spiked mace. Here's the weapon that was so savage, emperors tried to ban it twice. The spiked mace. Unlike swords that required skill, the mace required only strength and the willingness to turn human bones into powder. Weighing up to 15 pounds, these weapons were topped with iron spikes, flanges, or knobs designed to concentrate maximum force into the smallest impact area. One swing could shatter every bone in an arm or cave in a chest cavity. Mace-wielding gladiators were often used against heavily armored opponents because the weapon didn't need to penetrate armor. It would simply crush whatever was underneath. There are accounts of mace fighters who would deliberately target kneecaps and elbows, leaving opponents alive but permanently crippled for the crowd's entertainment. Emperor Marcus Aurelius banned spiked maces in 161 AD after a match where a gladiator's head was completely pulverized, spraying brain matter into the front rows of spectators. The ban lasted exactly 3 years before public demand brought them back. 8. Falx. When the Romans conquered Dacia, they brought back one of the most feared weapons in the ancient world, the falx. This two-handed curved blade was so effective that it forced the Roman army to redesign their helmets and armor. In the arena, the falx was a crowd favorite because of its spectacular killing potential. The curved blade could be swung overhead with enough force to split a man from shoulder to hip in a single strike. Gladiators who trained to use the falx were often matched against multiple opponents because the weapon was considered so superior. One documented match from 106 AD featured a single Dacian gladiator with a falx against 5 Roman-style fighters. The Dacian killed 4 of them in less than 2 minutes, using the weapon's reach and power to devastating effect. The crowd was so impressed, they demanded the 5th opponent be spared and the Dacian be granted his freedom. Number 9. Pugio. Every gladiator carried a backup weapon, the Pugio dagger. At 8 to 11 inches long, it was designed for close-quarters combat when everything else failed. But in the arena, the Pugio became something more sinister, the weapon of betrayal and surprise. Smart gladiators would pretend to be defeated, then draw their hidden Pugio for a surprise attack. The blade was designed to slip between armor plates and find vital organs with surgical precision. Many honorable victories were actually won with a concealed Pugio thrust at the last second. The most famous Pugio kill in Colosseum history occurred in 118 AD when a gladiator named Marcus appeared to surrender to his opponent. As the victor turned to acknowledge the crowd's cheers, Marcus drew his Pugio and drove it up under his opponent's helmet, killing him instantly. The crowd's reaction was so violent that Emperor Hadrian ordered Marcus thrown to the lions immediately. 10th. Double-hooked blade. Used in exotic special matches, the double-hooked blade was designed for one purpose: to gut opponents like fish. The weapon featured curved hooks on both sides of the blade that would catch intestines and pull them out of the body cavity. These weapons were reserved for the most brutal exhibitions, often involving condemned criminals or prisoners of war. The hooks ensured that even a minor wound would be fatal, as internal organs were literally pulled out of the body. Emperor Caligula was particularly fond of double-hooked blade matches and would order them whenever he wanted to make a political statement. One recorded match involved a Christian prisoner who was forced to fight against a gladiator with this weapon. The fight lasted over an hour as the gladiator slowly and methodically used the hooks to disembowel his opponent while keeping him alive.
11th, bladed shield.
Why carry a separate weapon when your shield could kill? Some gladiators modified their traditional Roman shields by adding sharpened edges, turning defensive equipment into lethal weapons. The bladed scutum was used for shield-bashing attacks that could decapitate opponents or slice through limbs. The technique required incredible strength and timing, but when executed properly, it was devastatingly effective. Historical records describe a gladiator named Titus who specialized in bladed shield combat. His signature move was to feint with his sword, then deliver a horizontal shield strike that would cut his opponent in half at the waist. He won 23 consecutive matches using this technique before being killed by a retiarius who caught him in a net. 12. Ball and chain flail. Used primarily in barbarian-themed matches, the ball and chain flail was designed to simulate the wild, undisciplined fighting style of Rome's enemies. The weapon consisted of a heavy spiked ball connected to a handle by a chain. The unpredictable nature of the flail made it dangerous for both the wielder and the opponent. Expert flail fighters could wrap the chain around an enemy's weapon or limb, then use the momentum to deliver bone-crushing blows. One famous flail match from 95 AD involved a Celtic prisoner who managed to kill 3 Roman-style gladiators using only a flail. His technique was to swing the weapon in wide circles to keep opponents at bay, then suddenly change direction to deliver killing blows to the head or chest.
13. Plumbatai.
Before close combat began, some gladiators would unleash a barrage of plumbatai, weighted throwing darts designed to wound and disorient opponents. These weren't meant to kill immediately, but to weaken enemies before the real fight started. Each dart was carefully weighted and feathered for accuracy and could penetrate light armor at distances up to 50 feet. Gladiators would typically carry 5 to 6 darts and throw them in rapid succession to create chaos and confusion. The most effective use of plumbatai was recorded in 89 AD when a lightly armored gladiator faced off against 3 heavily armored opponents. Using his darts, he managed to wound all 3 before closing in with his gladius to finish them off. The crowd appreciated the tactical brilliance as much as the bloodshed. Number 14. Pilum. Borrowed from Roman military tactics, the pilum was a javelin designed to break through shields and armor. In the arena, it was used to spectacular effect in reenactments of famous battles. The pilum's iron tip was soft, designed to bend on impact so it couldn't be thrown back. When it hit a shield, it would penetrate and then bend, making the shield unusable and leaving the opponent vulnerable. During the inaugural games of the Colosseum in 80 AD, Emperor Titus staged a massive reenactment of the Battle of Alesia. Hundreds of gladiators armed with pila recreated Caesar's victory over Vercingetorix. The battle lasted an entire day and resulted in over 300 deaths, all for the entertainment of the Roman people. Number 15. Torch. In mythological reenactments and special exhibitions, some gladiators fought with flaming torches. These weren't just for show. They were legitimate weapons that could blind, burn, and terrorize opponents. The torch was particularly effective in enclosed spaces or when fighting wild animals. The flame would panic beasts and could be used to set opponents' clothing or hair on fire during combat. One memorable torch fight occurred in 103 AD when Emperor Trajan ordered a reenactment of the myth of Prometheus. A gladiator armed with torches faced off against actors dressed as eagles in a darkened arena. The flames created dancing shadows on the walls, while the gladiator used fire to drive off his attackers before finally being overwhelmed. 16. Anchor blade. For naval-themed games called naumachiae, specialized gladiators called retiari maritimi wielded anchor-shaped blades. These weapons combined the hooking power of an anchor with the cutting edge of a sword. The anchor blade could catch and hold onto opponents while the wielder used the pointed end to deliver fatal strikes. The weapon was particularly effective against armored opponents as it could hook onto armor plates and drag fighters off balance. During a massive naumachia staged by Emperor Claudius in 52 AD, over 100 gladiators armed with anchor blades fought on flooded ships. The battle was so realistic that several participants actually drowned, making it one of the few gladiator events where water was as deadly as weapons. 17. Saw-edged sword. Reserved for the most brutal executions and condemned prisoner fights, the saw-edged sword was designed to cause maximum pain and suffering. The serrated edge would tear flesh rather than cut cleanly, creating wounds that were both agonizing and impossible to heal. These weapons were never used in regular gladiator matches because they were considered too cruel even by Roman standards. They appeared only in special executions or when emperors wanted to make particularly brutal examples of criminals. Emperor Domitian once ordered a Christian prisoner to face a gladiator armed with a saw-edged sword. The fight lasted over 2 hours as the gladiator slowly cut the prisoner to pieces while keeping him alive. Even the bloodthirsty Roman crowd eventually fell silent at the brutality. 18. Flagrum. The flagrum wasn't just a whip, it was a multi-thonged instrument of torture with metal or bone fragments embedded in each strand. When used in the arena, it could strip flesh from bone with a single strike. Gladiators armed with flagra were often matched against multiple opponents or wild animals. The weapon's reach and ability to strike multiple targets made it effective for crowd control and creating spectacular displays of violence. One documented match from 78 AD featured a gladiator with a flagrum against a pack of wolves released into the arena. Using the whip's reach and the animal's fear of the cracking sound, he managed to kill all 6 wolves by breaking their spines with precisely placed strikes. 19. The funda. The sling, or funda, was one of the most underestimated weapons in the arena. Capable of hurling lead bullets at speeds over 100 miles per hour, it could kill silently from a distance of over 200 feet. Sling bullets were often inscribed with insults or threats aimed at specific opponents. Archaeological excavations have found bullets with messages like, "Take this," and "For your skull," ancient trash talk that preceded death. The most impressive sling performance in Colosseum history occurred in 97 AD when a single gladiator armed only with a sling faced off against 10 opponents in a David versus Goliath themed match. Using his mobility and accuracy, he killed 9 of them with headshots before being overwhelmed by the survivor. And number 20. The weighted chain. The most desperate weapon in our list, the weighted chain. Often, condemned prisoners were chained together and forced to fight. Some learned to use these very chains as weapons, turning their bondage into a tool of survival. A skilled chain fighter could strangle opponents, break bones, or use the weight to deliver crushing blows. The psychological impact was enormous. Watching a chained prisoner kill trained gladiators reminded everyone of the thin line between civilization and savagery. The most famous chain fight occurred in 110 AD when a group of Jewish prisoners from the Bar Kokhba revolt were chained together and forced to fight professional gladiators. Using coordinated chain attacks, they managed to kill several gladiators before being overwhelmed. Their bravery was so impressive that Emperor Trajan ordered the survivors to be freed. But gladiators didn't just fight each other. They faced some of the most dangerous predators on Earth. The Colosseum's underground chambers housed lions, tigers, bears, elephants, and even hippos brought from across the empire. The most spectacular animal hunts, called venaciones, featured gladiators known as bestiarii, who specialized in animal combat. These fighters used specialized weapons like long spears, nets, and even crossbows to take down massive predators. Emperor Commodus himself participated in venations, though his opponents were often declawed or weakened. Historical records show he claimed to have killed over 100 lions, though many historians believe these were staged exhibitions rather than real hunts. The most brutal animal execution in Colosseum history occurred in 107 AD when Emperor Trajan ordered 10,000 wild animals to be killed during 123 days of games celebrating his victory over Dacia. The slaughter was so extensive that several species were driven to near extinction in North Africa. Animals were also used for executions called damnatio ad bestias, condemned to the beasts. Criminals would be tied to posts or sent into the arena naked to be torn apart by hungry predators. These weren't fights. They were public executions designed to terrorize the population. The Colosseum operated for over 350 years, hosting an estimated 1 million human deaths and countless animal slaughters. These weapons weren't just tools of entertainment. They were instruments of Roman social control, demonstrating the empire's power over life and death. Gladiator schools, called ludi, were sophisticated training facilities where fighters learned to use these weapons with deadly precision. The largest school, the Ludus Magnus, was connected to the Colosseum by an underground tunnel and could house over 3,000 gladiators. The economic impact was enormous. A single day of games could cost the equivalent of millions of modern dollars. Weapons were crafted by specialized smiths, armor was custom-fitted, and the logistics of moving exotic animals from across the empire required massive resources. But perhaps most importantly, these weapons and the spectacles they enabled helped maintain Roman social order. By providing free entertainment and demonstrating the consequences of rebellion, the games served as both bread and circus, keeping the population fed and distracted while reinforcing imperial power. The Colosseum was a theater of death where human life was the ultimate form of entertainment. These weapons weren't just tools, they were props in the greatest and most deadly show on Earth. We know all this because the Romans kept detailed records of fights, weapons, gladiator statistics, and even betting odds. They were so proud of their deadly spectacles that they wanted future generations to remember them. So, which weapon would you least want to face in the arena? Could you have survived even one fight with these brutal instruments of death? Let us know in the comments below.